then maybe my I get a 55% lift instead of 45%, which when at scale becomes a lot of money. You're listening to the Brand Growth Project with Rob J. Green and Ryan McKenzie. And today we're talking about the hidden split test data that could be dragging down your campaign's performance.
Awesome, Ryan. Thanks for the intro. And this is going to be this is really interesting. As you know, we were chatting a little bit about this prior to going live here, and we're chatting about a specific split test that you were running, and thought it would make sense to dive into this as a bit of a case study, because I think there's some really interesting information and really interesting data that you got out of this that can really make a difference when used right, and kind of gives another layer to the whole split testing equation when someone's running a split test, planning a split test, and most importantly, harvesting the data from the split test to actually be able to make decisions in their business. So I guess best place to start would be, do you want to give a little rundown of what the case study is and what split test you were running, the overview, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the data.
Yeah, for sure. So we had this hypothesis that having the basically the add to cart buttons basically on our second page in our funnel above the fold was going to increase conversions. So basically what we did is we shrunk the text above the fold. We had some images and stuff like that were kind of overkill, and we ran a split test that had a second version that just basically said choose the product below, basically, for lack of better terms, and we ran it, and within a day we were already seeing great numbers. So we let it continue running, and the experiment is now complete with 100% chance of winning for the smaller text version, which pushed the buttons above the fold. It won with an 11.27% conversion rate versus an 8.94% conversion rate on the one with the larger text above the fold that happened to push the buttons below the fold on a lot of devices. So that seemed awesome, right? Like that's like something like a 45% increase in conversions. I think most people would probably be pretty happy with that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, that's stellar, man. And when it comes to so when you were looking at that was kind of looking at the whole data, right? That was the data across everything. So basically just this versus this, and looking at all traffic. And was this, just out of curiosity, was this around one specific traffic source, or were you looking at this basically for the page across all traffic sources?
This is basically all traffic sources.
Okay,
So
cool.
it's a macro view. There's a lot of data flying at it. So yeah, it was basically it's mostly coming from Facebook, a little bit from Instagram, but and a little bit from Google. But we send a lot of traffic, so each version or each variant received adequate traffic to make sure that it was fair.
Awesome. So essentially, this is being a global split test on this page. You could just basically take this, run with that new page, and see. What was it 43%? You said?
Yeah, about 43. Let me just pull up the excuse me. The exact data was, improvement was up about 45% total increase, which is huge, right? Like, most days I would kill to get a 45% bump in conversion. But
I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
when it comes to that, was there anything specifically you were using to run the split test, or were you just basically, were they two different landing pages with the differences, and then just splitting your traffic, or what were you running the split test with?
Yeah, so we use Google Optimize, and
Perfect.
I prefer to do redirect tests. So when they get to the page, basically Google divides up the traffic. It either sends them to the original or to my variant, and I don't have like they have like I forget what it's called. There's some sort of like accelerated version where it starts to send more traffic to the winner. I'm just doing straight 50-50 split test. And I think we sent for Reference, we sent about 7,000 sessions to this experiment.
Okay, yeah. So you're not doing it's not automatically optimizing, right?
No,
As it starts to see what the winner is, it's basically just staying 50-50 until you end
yeah,
the test. Cool. Yeah, because that's helpful for someone on how you set up that split test, what tool you use, all of that sort of jazz. And that's a really that way's very straightforward for doing those tests, right?
totally, yeah.
Yeah.
I also, sorry, just one other thing I forgot to mention. So the first thing I do is we do it based on transactions, and then the secondary element or objective that we base it off is revenue.
Okay, so you're looking at essentially those conversions, those transactions, number one, and then the actual value of the conversions.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah, which totally makes sense because obviously, in order for you to use value as the primary metric, you'd need to be sending a lot of conversions. Otherwise, one big transaction is going to throw everything off a lot.
100%.
That's perfect. So, kind of as a top level, okay, across all traffic, et cetera, et cetera. You saw the 43% increase, which is awesome. But where it got really interesting when we were chatting before is that as you start to dive a little deeper here, right, and you pull back the curtain, if you will, then there's a bit more to learn from it.
Definitely. So it's funny, I didn't actually used to dig deeper until probably about 6 months ago when I was having a conversation with a couple other e-commerce guys, and they were like, "Yeah, this experiment absolutely killed it on desktop, but it tanked on mobile." And I was like, "Oh, that's unreleased." I mean, obviously that's a thing, but I just kind of always looked at it from a macro view, and I never thought about the fact that if something's doing well on one but not the other, what can I do? Like, first of all, why is that happening? And second of all, is there something that I can do to make the equivalent test viable on the one that's losing, so that I can capture that lift on multiple platforms? Um, and so basically now, once when a test is done, or even when it's in the middle of it, I'll segment out the obviously they're built into Google, so they have like mobile and tablet, they have desktop and tablet, and they have mobile only, and they have straight tablet. And in this particular situation, what was super interesting was that mobile and tablet were winning as a whole. I can tell you those exact numbers here. Let me just change this segment. I think it was sorry, one sec. Edit. Let me just pull that up. Um, Sorry, I have to refresh. This is being finicky. I think it won by about, it had the greatest lift, and desktop and tablet when blended, it was like there was only a 0.05% lift. And then when I went and looked at tablets independently, it actually lost by like 40%. So I'm like, that's super strange. So I went and I started looking at the actual, like, anybody can do this inside Chrome. You can actually look at what your website looks like on in different browsers and on different devices. So I went and set up specific segments for different tablet sizes. I went and looked up what the most common tablet sizes are, and I think it's 728 by 1080 and 1280 by 800. And when I brought those up on my desktop in like on a virtual environment, I noticed that those add to cart buttons, which were part of my hypothesis originally, to get them above was off the screen, so it was below the fold. And those were the segments that we're losing in this experiment. So I haven't finished and gone ahead and done this yet, but I'm simply going to recreate the experiment again, and I'm going to make sure that those two segments have the buttons where I want them. So it's not the hugest chunk of the traffic, hugest chunk of my traffic, but if it's 20% of my traffic and I can get that positive on the experiment as well, then maybe my I get a 55% lift instead of 45%, which when at scale becomes a lot of money.
Hmm. Yeah, and so you were finding the biggest improvement was it for mobile? The biggest improvement?
Yeah, mobile. Sorry, let me just try to. I'm gonna reopen this here because it's got some segments stuck.
Well, the nice thing is that one of the biggest takeaways when it comes to this, right? Is the when looking at what you're trying to split test, making sure that obviously the your hypothesis, that change or that element of your page, right? That it's that it displays the way that you want it to on every single one of those devices that you're split testing, right? That'd be one
Totally.
piece. Um,
100%, yeah.
and then the other big piece there is around the fact that the the differences, right? The differences in performance across those different pages is something to really dive into and look at, right? So one's around the how we split test. The other is diving in and just looking at our data, not even in a split test environment, but looking at our data down to each one of those devices, right? In order to get an idea of where there are some weirdly low conversion rates, right? Or weirdly high conversion rates, and then going and looking at how the page actually displays on that device and using that as a way to even come up with a new hypothesis of what you want to split test on other devices, right? Because if you look at the device and you go and you see that one specific, size of screen is outperforming all the rest by a good margin, it's going and looking at the page on that device and going, what is different about the way this looks compared to the other placements, and how can I test making the other placements look like this and see what happens?
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's like, and a lot of times I think we get hung up on our own beliefs with this stuff too, right? Like oh, the text is too small on mobile to have those two columns side by side, but that might be what you think is too small. But in fact, when there's small like that and people can, it allows the buttons to be seen for the call to actions. You could actually get a huge lift. So even you have to kind of put your own beliefs aside with what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, and do the test to really find out whether things are going to give you a lift. Or because I mean, I don't know about you, but like I look at pages and I think, oh, that's ugly or that's awesome, and somebody will show me another version of that page that's hideous or way better looking, and half the time it surprises me what wins. Or another good example is like I'll have a hypothesis and I think for sure, like I give you another example. I have this offer. It's like a basically an online membership, and there wasn't a call to action above the fold, and I was like, okay, let's do an experiment. We'll push the button above the fold. This is gonna drive up sales. And it didn't. It tanked it because the person needed to read the lead in order to get to emotionally buy in to the offer. And I never would have come to that conclusion on my own, because I just would have assumed that having that button above the fold was going to generate more sales by having the person click it. So that's kind of like a secondary lesson in here, is like test everything, because half the time what you think is going to work isn't, and the thing that you think that isn't going to work is.
And you touched on a big piece of the psychology piece of the puzzle, right? Which is in that case, they basically needed to consume a certain bit of information, right? Before they saw that they had an opportunity to buy something, right? Because basically you still had the button in both cases, just one of them you had the button show right away, and the other they had to consume a certain amount of essentially selling or pre-selling content before they knew they could buy something, essentially, or before they were asked to buy it, right?
Yeah.
So looking at a situation like that, it's also that also goes into, and this is kind of a little bit outside of split testing, but it's also a split test you can run. And this is the idea of when we look at the process someone needs to go through to make that purchase. If you're dealing with completely, like, let's say you're dealing with, let's start off with, if you're dealing with warm traffic, right? So people who know who you are as a brand, they know your product, right? They just haven't made the purchase yet. Often what we can do is we can remove steps and remove content and increase conversion, right? So if we think of from a, whether this be someone clicking from a email or clicking from an ad, often we can go directly to a sales page or directly to an order page, like a checkout page, right? And because we're taking out more of those steps, we actually can increase conversion rate when people already know about the product, already know about the brand. But sometimes we're dealing with completely cold traffic. We need to go from that, ad or that email click to a landing page that completely pre-sells that, right? And then from there, they need to go to that next step. And it could be that we need a few pages of content to warm someone up to the point that we can get them to a cart and checkout page. But so what you touched on there, just thinking about the content someone sees before or after a click can also be taken to what content they need to see before or after they have the opportunity to essentially add something to the cart. And that can be pages sometimes, or that can be, just content that pushes the button below the fold. I think that's awesome.
Totally. One other thing, kind of tied to digging into the data that we were mentioning earlier that you brought up when we were talking before this call here, was another really interesting thing to look at, either at the end of your experiment or even in the midst of it, is different, not just the device type like mobile traffic, tablet and desktop traffic, or creating your own resolutions or whatever, is looking at what type of operating system the user is using. I know you said you had some experience where only people using iOS were converting on your offers, and Android was just performing absolutely horribly. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, yeah. It's you've got when it comes to type of device, like when you're talking about, say, mobile versus tablet versus desktop, you're really dealing with how the page displays, right? How the page displays and what content you see first, how the size of the font that comes up, you know what I mean? What's above the fold. Like, these are some of the main elements of that. But then when you get into the actual operating systems, so in other words, the actual devices someone has or the operating systems they use, so when you look at, say, Windows versus Mac from a desktop standpoint, right? Or iOS versus Android from a mobile or tablet standpoint, now you get into, though the pages may display almost the same on both devices, you get into more the psychology of the user, right? Because different people use Macs versus use PCs, right? And different people use Android phones versus iPhones. And so you get into that element of it. And what I was referencing when it came to that was a couple different examples. One's Facebook ads related, so Facebook advertising ecosystem, and this is a brand that we're spending anywhere from, most of the time, kind of as an every single day, $25,000-$30,000 a day, and basically up to, Black Friday weekend, we're spending, it was over $200,000, $211,000, I think, this last Black Friday, and about $800,000 over the Black Friday Cyber Monday weekend. So anywhere from that $30,000 up to a couple $100,000 a day. With that brand, when we started going in and really looking at the data across, especially when we're talking about cold audiences, right? So where Facebook, so if we're running all placements, all devices, all operating systems, Facebook's actually spending about 85% of that spend. The algorithm is spending 85% of that spend on iOS and Mac compared to Windows and Android. So we really were diving into, and obviously, this is something we can go into deeper in another call, but ultimately, we're really looking at, one, being like, what's the conversion rate difference? Why is there a difference? Both from the psychology standpoint of people who use Android, right, versus iOS, but then also looking at, is it the fact that you have a little more conversion rate on iOS, and then Facebook is focused on iOS, or is it the fact that, so basically that Android would still be worth targeting, or is it that Android converts at a low enough percent that it's not profitable to target Android? So that's something, if you do dive into this and you're looking at this in your account, one of the biggest things is look at what devices are being served, right? And then looking at whether or not is the underserved segment, right? The underserved device, is it actually correct that it's being underserved? right? So is it actually the right thing for the algorithm to be doing? Or is the algorithm just essentially fixated on these devices and ignoring these devices because of a small conversion rate difference? But you actually do want to be targeting the other device. And then you can think of splitting that out into its own targeting group and all of that. But that was one where it was, tablet versus mobile versus desktop were all performing well, but iOS was just monopolizing the spend, right? iOS and Mac. And the other example that I was chatting about before we hopped on the call was actually, this one isn't Facebook ecosystem. This is actually a native advertising campaign. And this one actually happens to be on Outbrain. So we were running, on this test, we were running across just desktop and tablet. So we're not running mobile in this case, but just desktop and tablet. And on this campaign, we were seeing okay numbers, but we were definitely above the CPA we wanted to be. So then when we dive into that data, tablet and desktop were performing very, very similarly. But when we actually dived into it, it was very, very clear. We could see that iOS and Mac were performing very well on iOS and Mac, but Windows and Android were basically across the board losing money. So it was an easy fix to essentially just target only iOS and Mac. This happens to be a different brand that we're targeting. So again, we're seeing iOS and Mac outperforming, and these are actually two different brands. So if we were to just have looked at that campaign and looked at the blended across all devices, we would have just turned that off. We would have been like, that doesn't work, that targeting group doesn't work, or those ads don't work. But when we dive in, we could be like, oh, never mind, half of it does, right? All the iOS and Mac does, but it doesn't make sense for us to be targeting Windows or Android in that case.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy the stuff you can find if you take the time to dig.
Are you seeing anything, just out of curiosity, do we have some of that data on, say, iOS versus Android or PC versus Mac from the split test, the case study that we were talking about that you were running there?
Yeah, let me just bring these segments up. It
Awesome.
lets me put a couple in here. I think it lets you limit you to 3 at a time. So just give me 1 sec, and I will. Oops, sorry, I just clicked over to that other split test that I was talking about.
Just ask questions that involve you having to pull things up on the fly, right?
I had it ready to go, and then I mentioned the split test on the moving the button, which made me switch browsers. So 1 sec, here you go. It's pulling up right now. So, of course, it's going to be slow. The slowest loading. Oh, and now there's an error.
No worries.
Come on. All right, here we go. So we're going to add, I'm going to pull up. So iOS, Android. So between iOS and Android, it looks like they were both winners. iOS on this particular split test. We had, it actually wasn't as crazy of a winner as I would have expected. iOS was 9.36% conversion rate, where with the smaller text, and the original was 8.21. It was still significant enough that I would definitely do it. But I would imagine that this number was being dragged down by the huge number of Apple tablets that are running 768 resolution. When it comes to Android, we converted, with the smaller text above the fold, we converted 11.23% versus 8.93 on the original. And again, my hypothesis with this would be that there's a lot less Android tablets running out in the wild, and I think many of the ones that are usually running at higher resolutions. And then when we compare that to Mac versus Windows, 1 second here. So we got Mac and we've got Windows. We compare it to basically desktop computers. The Mac was converting at 15.57% with the smaller text versus 10.41%. So like That one's basically a 50% lift, which is massive. Um, so it's funny because I put this split test together initially for mobile, not for desktop, because there's things are above the fold already or close to it. But with Windows, the lift was not as significant. It was 12.14% on the smaller text versus 11.65 on the original. Not 100% sure why. Again, I would kind of venture to guess that a lot of people that are running Windows operating systems are probably running at higher resolutions where both variants had the call to action above the fold. That's the only thing I can really guess here. So the work that I'm going to put in is I'm basically going to fix the two resolutions when I dug really deep were the 768 by 1024 and 1280 by 800, I believe they are, and those are two different tablet resolutions. When I dug around inside Chrome and looked at the different devices that were getting negatively impacted, I noticed that devices like the Pixel and the Galaxy S5, which is old now, those buttons were still pushing below the fold. So yeah, where I go from here is I'm basically going to correct every version of this page I can to try to make it accommodate at least eight, kind of go with the 80-20 rule here and make sure the top 80% of all of our traffic sources, or traffic devices, are able to see this page how I intended with the original split test.
Perfect. I like it. And I mean, the big thing for me that jumps out with all of this, is number one, just don't think or don't presume that the data across all your devices, all operating systems, all browsers, etc., are the same. Right? When you look at how something is performing, whether this be, when we blend all traffic sources, or even when you're talking about a specific traffic source, right? It's not presuming that everything's going to perform the same. And then when you do run a split test, where in your case, like, can we get this button above the fold, right? Is knowing that how that displays on every single device is going to influence that data a lot. And then the other piece would be the looking at different devices to find those split tests to run. Like, why is this one an anomaly for how well it converts? In addition to those pieces, anything else that kind of jumps out to you as things people should really, takeaways of tangible ways to use this split test, like in their own business?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is especially if in this for this particular product, it's something that people buy without a lot of digging. So it totally depends on the product, but I would really look at a really simple experiment that everybody should be doing, especially if you're paying for traffic, is making sure that if it's a first time viewer or visitor typically buys, making sure that all the information or the core information they need to know is above the fold on their devices as well as their laptops, and that you're not basically missing out on opportunity to sell them by having unneeded beautification elements to your site that it might be great for branding. And I'm not knocking branding in any way here, because it's definitely part of the experience and creating a status based product. But consider minimizing the flashiness on the pages where people are looking to make a purchase. The least amount of friction, the better. And hey, worst case scenario, you test it and it loses, and you can rest easy at night knowing that your sexy branding is actually helping you in the long run. But test trying to make the user experience better, pushing everything up, and see what happens. Because this split test actually came after another split test where I had two different versions of a product that you could buy, and they were stacked on top of each other on mobile instead of being side by side. And I was like, the text is too small. It's gonna look like crap on mobile. Nobody's gonna buy this. And it had 100% conversion rate lift by putting them side by side. 100% conversion rate. Like that's life changing conversion rate numbers. Like, we were already positive ROI with this campaign. Like, that just knocked it up a notch. So, I just work. If everybody could be doing experiments, do them. Like, my personal KPI is to always have 3 experiments running per month, whether it's with usability or other stuff. But like, just do it, because it's you find out pretty quickly if something's a stinker. But when you find a winner, like, it can have such a profound impact on your ability to scale and spend more money.
Oh, the 100% difference in conversion rate will literally take you from, I have to turn off all my ads to almost all of my campaigns work, right? Like, that's a shocking difference, right?
Yeah.
When you actually are dealing with, especially when you're dealing with paid media, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's like, it's nuts. So, and there's lots of things out there. Like, and if you can get like 5 or 6 things that give you a 5%, 10% lift, like those add up quick.
For sure. And then, I mean, as we start to, like, we're talking right now only about, what we can do on our website, right? On our website to move the dial, and looking at those split tests we can run there. And, I think, like we were chatting about this earlier, but it would be awesome to do, we'll dive a little deeper into some of the on platform. So your advertising side of split testing too, because just taking a look at these pieces here, we start to look at what can you be split testing at any time on the website, and then what can you be split testing at any time on your advertising platform. And when you combine those two pieces, you can massively improve the return on ad spend. And in a lot of cases, you open up your ability to scale so much by not just going, I run some ads, I send them to this page, and I'm either profitable or not profitable, right? It's not that simple. There's a lot of things you can test both on site and in ads. So I'm excited to chat with you about that one too. But this case study, man, that's super, super, super helpful for people. And I would love to hear if if you're listening to this and you do try one of these, a split test similar to this, or if you just dive into your data and you see some of these, big anomalies around different devices, different resolutions, different operating systems, drop us a note. I'd love to hear from you, what you find from this, even just useful information or some cool split tests that you run. That'd be very cool.
Excited to hear what people are doing, because I don't know about you, but I could run split tests all day. If I could think of something to do with a split test, like I could nerd out on that for days. And I'm just rambling here, but it's I wish I could just be a CRO guy full time. It's my like absolute favorite thing. Like, next to seeing your phone light up with like Stripe payment notifications, my next favorite thing is like waking up in the morning, rolling over, grabbing my phone, and looking at Google Optimize to see if I'm getting a lift. That sounds
love it.
Dirty.
I love it. I love it, Ryan. I love it. Very cool. I think that's going to be some good takeaways for people. And like I said, do drop us a note if you do look into some of this data, you do run some of this split tests, and I'm looking forward to. I think on our next episode, we might have to dive into those split tests around the actual ad side, and basically, combine the two and look at how we can optimize that entire funnel and see how things are working. How's that sound?
Love it. Let's do it.
Awesome, man. Well, I look forward to chatting with you again. And where would people track you down if they wanted to, say, share some of the data they're seeing, or a cool split test, or even give you an idea of something they tried on their site that they saw a lift of, and they say, hey, Ryan, you should run the split test? Where would they track you down to chat with you?
You can connect with me on good old-fashioned Facebook on my business page at facebook.com/the RYE Mackenzie, McKenzie, or Z if you're in Canada. And how about you, Rob? If people want to track you down, feed you split test data, and tell you how awesome your hair is, where would they find you? Rob has long, beautiful locks for the listeners out there who don't know.
And they can track me down either at on Facebook or on Instagram at Rob J Green Official, or they can track me down at just robjgreen.com. So either of those work perfectly.
I am jealous of your hair, for the record. I can't do it. I've tried like 10 times. It gets like to the bottom of my ears, and I want to kill myself. So
The key,
I envy you.
The key is just not to cut it. See, when you don't cut it, it gets long.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's like showing up. You just got to show up.
Yeah, it's profound, right? It's profound. Just don't cut it.
That right there is probably a good intro for this podcast.
I like it. Awesome, man. Well, you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I am really interested to hear what people find when they dive into their data or run some split tests. So please do reach out to us. And other than that, you have a fantastic rest of your day, and let's talk about ad split testing in the next call.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Toodles.
Talk to you soon.